So today I want to talk about something that I see on the internet quite a bit more recently. It's a device they call a kerf maker. I generally refer to this as a blade gauge. The reason why is because this little screw here helps to offset the thickness of the blade when making a dado. Anybody who's ever tried to make a dado with a crosscut sled, typically you might think that you could put your stock in against your stop block, make your first kerf cut, remove the block, make your second kerf cut. But what's going to happen is you're going to be left with a dado that's exactly wider than your plywood or other material by the thickness of the blade. So to help reduce that or make that better is make a device called a blade gauge. It's got a screw here. It allows you to take the thickness of the material, lock it down, remove the material, put it against your stop block, cut your first kerf, swing it all the way around with the screw, which is set exactly the thickness of the blade, against your stop block, and now you have made your second cut, which gives you a perfect dado. I'm going to build one of these, and I'm going to build it out of, I made this one years ago out of Baltic birch plywood, but I'm going to make one maybe a little fancier out of this older piece of Brazilian cherry that I have. So let's get started. I'm going to mill this stock at 1 3/4 inches wide. Let's identify the parts and pieces that we're going to make for this gauge. We have a locking nut. It's just a piece of plywood with an embedded steel nut. We have 2 pieces of stock that are half lap dadoed so that they nest together. We have a slot with the approximate length of the largest piece of material that you might be dadoing. We also have a piece of material at the end which helps to capture the stock that we're trying to measure. And we have a through bolt that goes through and is mortised on the other side in the shape of the hex head. Let's go and make these parts. I set up a stop block here at 7 inches, and I'm just going to cut 2 pieces that match. Now we're going to take them to the dado, and we're going to cut the half laps. Let's take a look at what we've got. I just finished running these through the dado blade and creating the half laps. They fit together very nicely and they slide very smoothly. On the original, which was plywood, it's not too bad. But right now what we're going to do is we're going to make this slot in the same orientation because I like the way this one is set up. The initial hole was made at 2 1/4 roughly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a similar layout. I'm going to make a mark here at 2 1/4. And this slot is about 1 1/4 inches long. Now, depending on the material you're expecting to make dados in, that's how big you want to make this at least, so that you have a range of material that you can use. I've used this in the past for 1-inch material, but if you never expect to use 1-inch material, then only make it big enough to accommodate 3/4 inch materials, but at least make your slot slightly larger than that. In this case, I'm going to make my slot at 1 3/8 inches. I'm going to change it a little bit from that one, and that'll just give me a little bit more flexibility. Once I have made that, I also need to know how big the dado is that I made, since it was arbitrary as well. It looks like it's about 9/16. So I'm going to make a center line down the middle here, which is at 9/32, which is half of that. So here we go. So now I'm going to drill the second hole, which will be the other end of the slot, and I'm just offsetting the material below so that I don't drill through it, but it gives me support. Now I'm just going to make a series of holes between here and here for my slot. I'm going to use a file to clean up the space between. Okay. After a little bit of filing, it looks like we have a really nice fit, nice and loose. And what we're going to do is we're going to make an outline of this bolt on the wood, and then I'm going to drill out with the drill bit first for the mortise, and then I'll square it up with the chisel. Now that we have the bolt and the slot cut in our material, we're going to square up both ends, and then we're going to make a nut that fits here. Off camera, I cut a small little block. I just resawed it right down the middle, and now I'm just going to find center. Like I did before, I'm going to trace the perimeter of the nut on the wood and then chisel it out. Just shaping it by eye. I like to round the bottom just a touch so that there's a pressure point right in the center and it doesn't bind on the material when you're tightening it. Pretty nice. So now that we have the nut working perfectly, let's take a look at the gauge that I made quite a few years ago. Obviously I have an end on it here, so what we're going to do is we're going to take this stock right here and cut it to length. We're going to glue that piece on the end. Now I already squared up these ends, but it is important that this end be squared, so I squared it up on the miter saw so it looks good. I'm going to take it over to the edge sander and I'm going to sand these edges nice and smooth. Okay, I flushed up all the edges here and made it so everything is nice and smooth. Very nice. Put our nut back on. Now the only thing left is the screw. And that screw is right here. So if we look at our, let's flip it around. If we look at our piece here, that screw will go right on here, and that screw will be adjustable to the thickness of our blade, and I'll show you how that works in a second. But we're going to drill a pilot hole first. I have a little number 4 screw. Bugle head works the best. And that's only because you have a really defined flat point at which you can feel the teeth of your table saw lining up with this. So It's best to have a screw that's got a flat top on it, not something like a pocket hole screw, which is. So let me show you how it works. The guide finished and the screw inserted. We're going to butt the guide up against one of the teeth of the saw, and we're going to feel with our finger the head of the screw in relation to the thickness of the tooth. If the screw is a little proud, we want to advance it in. If it's a little low, we want to back it off just a touch. So I think I'm just a little bit low, so I'm going to back it off just a touch. And this is the brilliance of using a screw, is that it's infinitely adjustable, just depending on which blade you're using at the time. So I feel pretty good, and I'm sighting it also as well, making sure that it looks like it is even. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my crosscut sled up here, and I'm going to show you how it works. Okay, now that we have the jig complete, I'm going to show you how to use it. So first, just release the locking knob, and we're going to insert the material that's going to go into the dado, and we're just going to lock this against it. Just push it against it, lock the nut, and now we have the material sized. We're just going to remove it, and we're going to rotate it 180 degrees, and we're going to butt it up against our stop lock. I already have the blade set. I already have a scrap piece of material ready to dado, and we're going to make the first cut, which is the right hand side of the dado. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the guide and we are going to rotate it at the end with the screw. We're going to rotate it another 180 degrees, and we're going to butt this screw up against our stop lock. That screw is going to take up the space that the thickness of this blade would leave if we didn't have that screw. So now we're going to take our stock again, making sure that the cut we just made is facing down and to the right, and we're going to make the second cut of our dado. And then we're going to remove the material in between. Let's see how we did. A little tight, but it's definitely fits. So if the dado is too tight, we want to adjust the screw inward. That will set the gauge over to the right a little bit more, effectively making the dado slightly larger. So the nice thing is that if you err on the side of tight, you can always come back, adjust the screw in, and just cut a little bit more on the left side to get your dado correct. If you have the right side correct, then you can always adjust for the left side. But that's how this gauge works. I call it a blade gauge.